All right, good Tuesday afternoon, everyone. Thanks for stopping by for a check of your forecast. Hope everyone's doing well today. It is January 13th, the year of our Lord 2026. We'll be talking about some cold fronts expected to swing through the high plains later this week. The first one will come through tonight into tomorrow morning. The next one, a bit stronger, will arrive by the end of the week. Overall, though, kind of a quiet pattern for us outside of those two fronts for the near term. We're also going to talk about maybe what we can expect towards the end of January, possibly even getting into February. There are maybe a few signs trending towards potentially not necessarily cross polar flow, but polar disruption continuing through the end of the month, and that could maybe even lead to some Arctic air intruding into the South Plains. So we'll break that down here after your kind of your short range forecast. But you're looking at radar and water vapor imagery for right now. You can see we've got that closed upper level low continuing to weaken over in deep southwest Texas. That one has provided with a little bit of rain activity in east and southeast Texas. But that system continues to weaken and staying south of us. We do not expect any moisture from that one. We do see some high clouds rolling in out ahead of that big trough and that next front that's coming to swing through the south central plains. Here's a live look outside from Bushland. You can see that we've got some beautiful weather today, at least for right now. Winds are going to pick up heading into our Wednesday, which we'll talk about too. That could lead to some elevated fire conditions. Hey, Alrita, thanks for tuning in this afternoon. But traffic traveling okay over in Bushland on I-40. Temperature's very mild. It is 68 degrees here in Amarillo right now, 72 in Clarendon. Shamrock, you guys are leading the pack. It's 74 this afternoon, 67 in Tucumcari, and 61 in Clayton, New Mexico. Again, we've talked about this on Sunday and Monday. Those winds were going to be really, really calm, kind of a dime a dozen for the high plains. Definitely would encourage you to continue to get out and enjoy this quiet day we've got if you can. Otherwise, again, you're going to have some windier weather to battle for our Wednesday. Here's the highs for tomorrow. Notice again, it's a notable drop from where we're at currently. We're going to take about a 15 to 20 degree dip in those high temperatures tomorrow afternoon. And those winds are going to be breezy behind the cold front. That's going to be a purely wind driven fire condition concern for tomorrow. You can see the relative humidity values, they're very high for fire weather conditions. So again, that's not the big problem for us. The big issue is actually the wind gusting to 35 miles an hour out of the north. So that is why we're again having that elevated fire concern in the southeast, mainly the southeast half of the Texas Panhandle. Let's go ahead and run through the computer model real quick. Again, here comes our next cold front early in the morning. We are going to see some partly cloudy skies throughout the day. Probably will transition to mostly sunny by the end of the afternoon, but we do expect some clouds to still be streaming across the area. Notice again the north wind going to keep us kind of cold for your Thursday morning. A lot of us will be in the upper 20s, low 30s. We'll end up climbing back up into the 50s and 60s very quickly. In fact, most of us probably end up in the 60s on Thursday afternoon. And we'll see how strong the winds get along that surface trough. That's another potential concern, especially in the south row of counties from Clovis and back down towards Portales, extending east towards Childress and Paducah. We could see some relatively strong winds down there out ahead of that surface trough. So we could have some more elevated fire issues in that general area. I don't think it'll be for everyone, but some of us will probably see those winds still around 20, 25 miles an hour on Thursday afternoon down there closer to Levelland and Lubbock, and that's where we'll have some continued elevated fire conditions. But the rest of us probably get to at least take a back seat for the fire concerns. So here's that next weather maker, the second cold front that will come through by the end of the week. You can see again a lot of that really frigid air bottled up in the Canadian provinces up in the North Plains. Down to 10 degrees Friday morning there in Minneapolis, 29 in Billings, 21 in Omaha. And we'll be cold that afternoon. Amarillo dipping into the 40s for those high temperatures. But overall, it's going to be kind of a glancing blow for some of that colder air. A lot of that's going to stay bottled up in the Midwest and the New England area, which has kind of been the theme for most of this winter, which is very traditional for a La Nina pattern. This is something that, again, it's kind of a null space, but we are given an equal chance to see above and below normal precipitation between January 18th and the 22nd. And then as we get into the end of the month, notice you don't have a lot of that cold air back over here digging deep into the southeast part of the country. You've got a lot of warmer weather down south, and then you've got a lot of that cold air being bottled up, maybe potentially seeing the system or at least our weather pattern starting to load up for our next potential shot of colder air. I do want to go ahead and talk you through a couple of these things. So what this is that we're looking at right here, this is just purely a deterministic model. So take it with a large grain of salt. Don't want to take it for gospel truth. And we'll back up just one so you guys can see the date on here, January 13th, way up here in the top left-hand corner. So this is initialized for today. What this is the stratosphere, and you're looking at height anomalies. So where you see these blues right here, again, you've got that polar vortex disruption. Again, that's why you've got a lot of cold air here in the eastern half of Canada and back into the eastern half of the country. A lot of that has translated down to the bottom of the atmosphere and to the surface. And again, you've got a lot of this ridging here over Alaska, which continues to push a lot of that cold air through the Canadian provinces. But again, that pattern there really favoring the eastern half of the country for cold air, whereas the western half of the country stays warm. And again, if we do get those colder shots of air, it tends to be a glancing blow, kind of like what we're going to get this week. I'll go ahead and run this out for the next week or so. You can see that that lobe continues to recede back up closer towards the poleward region. And so this is, again, getting into that 8 to 10 day outlook where you can see that maybe the cold air starts to recede a little bit away from the Midwest back up into the Arctic area. But I want to show you kind of what happens towards the end of this model run. You can see where the main lobe is for the polar vortex. And this thing starts to really get displaced further to the south towards next weekend. And notice where it's at. It's not over the New England area, it's over the western Canadian provinces. And then watch what happens after we get through the weekend. You can see again, we've got two areas of much higher height anomalies, one building in over Greenland and back in to the North Atlantic, and then another big ridge building here across Siberia. And that would certainly allow for some additional cross-polar flow, but with this, that high being further to the west may help push some of this more through the plains region rather than into the eastern half of the country if this were to verify. Again, that's just a deterministic model. It is not gospel truth. So again, just take that with a large grain of salt. This is the ensemble. And you can see again, there's that main lobe. So this is kind of a better average. You can see it recedes, but then starts to dip back south as we get closer to next weekend. It's not as far west as the deterministic output was, but it's definitely further west than this previous displacement was. And so that may be something to keep an eye on as we get into the end of January, potentially that first week of February. It's a precursor. It almost is like a premonition of what could happen in the surface. Again, you're looking way up in the atmosphere. Some of that stuff has to translate down into the troposphere, but usually that's a telltale sign that we could start seeing some changes in the pattern as we get into that 7 to 14 day span after that. So that would put us in like that first 2 weeks of February. Now here's your Arctic oscillation. This is just kind of tracking where some of that cold air spilling south could potentially go. If it stays up north, you're going to see these lines and these ensembles favoring areas above the null space. When this thing trends negative, that usually is a good indicator of cold air intruding south into the continental US. And specifically the eastern half of the country. And notice we're kind of in null space right now, kind of stay there through this weekend. But then as we head through next week, notice again, a lot of these ensembles are at least trending towards null space, but probably more towards a negative oscillation or a phase there in the European ensemble. You look at the American ensemble, and it also, again, kind of favoring us to stay somewhere in that 1 to 3 standard deviations away from what would be considered normal or neutral for the Arctic oscillation. And you can see the Canadians actually a little bit more aggressive with that, with a 1 to 4 standard deviations away from null space, which would be a very good indicator that maybe some cold air could potentially spill to the south. The NAO kind of works in tandem with the AO. It's just kind of that North Atlantic, it's the Atlantic side of the Arctic oscillation. So usually a better indicator for the eastern half of the country, specifically New England and the East Coast, back up towards the Midwest. So this one doesn't play as big of a role for us here in the high plains, but we can get glance blows to some of that cold air. And you can kind of see here generally trending a little bit negative with that. And I did want to take a look. Well, let me go ahead and grab. Excuse all of our bookmarks. We've only got a million of them on here. I'll find it here in a second. Here we go. So I do want to show you again kind of where we're at with La Nina yet again. So you can see we've got a lot of cool water still across the equatorial Pacific. So still technically in La Nina, but we've noticed again trade winds have really died off here across the central Pacific. And when the trade winds die off, you don't get a lot of those easterlies that continue with the upwelling out here along the South American coast. You can see even again a little bit of some of these warmer lobes of water temperatures, maybe even some downwelling starting to show up where we get some warmer waters there in that Nino 1+2 region, which is again a telltale sign for more active weather here in the high plains. And so I do think that this might be something to keep an eye on as we head into the months of February, March, and April, specifically March and April. February, again, just kind of depends on how quickly we fade out of La Nina and really kind of what happens in this general area right in here. If we start seeing a lot of warm water showing up here, and again, we are expected to trend towards maybe a weak El Nino by the summer months, and that would be a better sign for our monsoon season. Hopefully, we would stay a little bit more wet here in the high plains, but it definitely has been very dry as of late. And so a fading La Nina is a good thing for us because we do need the moisture. We've been extremely dry. We've actually only had 807 inch of precipitation in Amarillo since the start of meteorological winter, which actually ties as 10th driest in that 43, 44-day stretch. But we again are starting to see maybe the wanings of La Nina, maybe the end of it. This is kind of its last gasp of air before we head into what would be considered a neutral phase. And I did want to grab some analog years where we potentially get a really good lobe or cross polar flow from here, and again, just looking at some analogs potentially for what we could maybe see heading into the months, the end of January and into the at least first half of February. If we get these big lobes of low pressure here in the stratosphere and you get these really cold air, the polar vortex again being displaced further south, and you get a lot of cross polar flow, again, you guys probably have heard enough about it that gets us a really good outbreak of cold air sometimes. And there's three analog years where we were fading out of La Nina, but we did get either a stratospheric warming event or we got cross polar flow or at least a stratospheric disruption. And we're definitely in the disruption stage right now. And we pulled the months of February for three different analog years. We had a pretty good disruption in 2018. Right now, I think 2018 is probably going to be our second best fit. The 2000 to 2001 had a really good weakening of La Nina late in the season, and we ended up getting some good cross-polar flow as we headed into the end of January. So in the Canadian stratospheric cooling event displaced kind of in where the GFS and the ensemble kind of want to put it at the end of January. So what I did was I basically just grabbed our temperature anomalies for those 3 months in those analog years. This is where, again, a lot of that cold air ended up spilling into the continental US. Again, we've kind of been maybe thinking that this could be further west this time than where a lot of that cold air has been going for most of winter. This is getting towards the end of maybe January and into February. So some of that colder air maybe staying closer or at least butted up next to the front range of the Rockies. You can see, well, you're only in the first shade, Corbin. Yeah, but look at the first shade. It's 3 degrees below normal. And I mean, you're talking about some extremely cold air from anomaly standpoints up there in Montana and the Dakotas. You're talking about 7 to maybe even 11 or 12 degrees below what's considered normal in the month of February. So really a lot of cold air kind of getting shot down here and lots of warm air in the eastern half of the country. So what does that mean for precipitation? Well, if we have a lot of cold air down here, usually that's indicative of a lot of troughing, and you can see that we're downstream of a trough. We can sometimes get some precipitation. When we get these Arctic outbreaks for Amarillo specifically in the high plains, it's more of a wind chill concern for us than it is precipitation. February 2021 was kind of an exception to the rule for that, where we ended up, I mean, we had winter precipitation. We actually had 13 inches of snow in 8 days, but it was 5 degrees when we had the 8 inches of snow the one day, and the snow to liquid ratio was like 45 to 1. So that would mean that 45 inches of snow would equate to 1 inch of rainfall, which is an extremely dry. I mean, that's like mountain snow. It's powder. You can't do anything with it. You can't ball it up into a snowball. Can't roll it into a snowman. That was kind of what we got to deal with in February of 2021. Now, we're not expecting that kind of an outbreak with this upcoming event, but I do think that we're probably in for a couple shots of maybe some more what we would classify as truly Arctic air into that general area. And again, this is just due to if we do, and this is a pattern. If we do see again a lot of that stratospheric warming or that stratospheric cooling over the western half of the Canadian provinces, you usually get a really good indicator of above average precipitation here, kind of down the Mississippi River Valley, which would be good for the Mississippi River. It is in low stage right now, especially in the Midwest. You can see kind of bullseyeing Arkansas with the best precipitation anomalies. Now, I do want to show you again kind of what the GFS has got us going in through the next I think this is through the next 2 weeks. Yeah, so this is 384 hours. So this is the ensemble. Notice again, staying dry at least here in the short term. But as we get towards the end, notice again, there's that signal popping up in the same general vicinity after we get past next weekend, towards the end of January and into February. So potentially maybe getting some bigger troughing to kind of dive and send some cold air straight through the central plains is something that at least the American model and the ensemble is really starting to try and hint at. Let me go ahead and pull over our temperatures. I want to show you those 7-day temperature anomalies too. You can see again, cold air kind of bottled up here. You can see as we get closer to maybe January 23rd, 24th, it's got a little bit further to the east than what we think it may end up being. I think it'll probably end up being butted up closer to the mountains. But definitely a signal that we need to pay attention to. And again, you can kind of see towards the 29th, starting to get a little bit more of that start to spill further to the south, down through the central plains as well. So something to keep in mind as we head into the months of February. Let's go ahead and jump over to our 7-day tracker. Again, all that stuff that we just talked about, kind of well out there past next week. If we're talking about winter, I would say there's probably an increased chance for winter weather, but I don't know if it would be a lot. Again, these Arctic outbreaks usually tend to be more of a cold weather situation for us here in the high plains than they do any kind of wintry precipitation. And actually, I forgot, I did want to show you a couple of things as well over here in our meteograms. So again, this is a deterministic model. Again, take that with a big grain of salt, but you can see it dips us down below zero for a couple of mornings. The European does. But let's take a quick look at the ensemble. This would be a more telling sign of potentially what to come. And what I want you to kind of do is just kind of blur your eyes a little bit and just kind of look at this. You can see we've got some colder weather, this weekend into next weekend. Again, that's that couple of cold fronts that we'll have coming through. But if you blur, you can see there's a lot of red and some really deep purple trying to show up out there at the end of the ensemble, just indicating maybe some of that Arctic air potentially intruding here into the high plains. If we take a look at the GFS as well, you kind of get that same story, maybe not as aggressive with the cold weather, but the sign is there. So I think that it's something that we'll have to pay attention to as we head into next week. But that is all I've got for you guys this afternoon. Thank you so much for stopping by. Enjoy the rest of your day today, and we will catch you tomorrow.